Good evening, everyone. Good evening. I'm Kate Markert. I'm Executive Director at Hillwood Estate Museum and Gardens. And I'm so happy to be welcoming all of you to our first hybrid event. I have a feeling we're going to have a lot of hybrid events in our future, but this is actually our very first one. And so we're very excited that you're here with us, both those of you here in front of me and those of you who are joining us by Zoom. So I just want to thank you all for being here and for listening as we talk with Kristine Mays, the contemporary artist who's brought you these gorgeous sculptures that I hope a lot of you have had a chance to see tonight. I do invite you all to please come to Hillwood, and there is so much to see here, especially this summer, because we not only have Kristine's fabulous sculptures, we have the porcelain flowers of Vladimir Kanevsky, and that's in the mansion until Labor Day. And we also have the Roaring Twenties exhibition, which is a phenomenally wonderful exhibition. That will also be here with Kristine's sculptures until the beginning of January. So I hope all of you will have a chance to see all of those. And then, of course, we have lots of upcoming programming. I cannot go into all of it, but what you need to do is be sure you're a member, and be sure you sign up for getting notifications, and be sure Hillwood is in your address book so that the notifications don't go to your spam file. But anyway, you'll hear about all kinds of very exciting programming that we have. We're open 10 to 5 Tuesday through Sunday, but we have a lot of programming in the evening. So look forward to that and getting notices about that. Okay, if you're joining us by Zoom, you can just make yourself comfortable. Your microphones are turned off. We can't see you. Just, you can use the Q&A feature to ask questions. And our moderator is going to get to all of the questions at the end. Our lovely moderator is going to get to the questions at the end. Now, a few reminders for everybody that's in the room. As you know, the district still recommends that we wear masks indoors. I appreciate that all of you are cooperating as far as that's concerned. We are all fully vaccinated, all of the speakers, and in order for you to hear us, we took our masks off while we're talking. And I haven't had to say this since February of 2019, but please be sure that all of your devices are turned off in this room.
Silent, not off.
Oh, silent. Oh, yes, silent, right. Because you are also going to be asking your questions using your devices. Not probably until the end, but if questions come to you as we're going through the program, just go ahead and shoot us that. You got a QR, there's QR codes at the door, right? And you also got a form when you signed up. So please do let us know any of your questions. So now, without further ado, I will introduce our wonderful speakers tonight. So Kristine Mays is an American artist. Yay! She's currently living and working in San Francisco. And she's independently trained, and she's self-described maker her entire life, and she's still making things like the crowns that you'll see in the store. She's making while she's here, and she's been a maker her entire life. Began creating with wire in 1993 after years of drawing, sketching, sewing, and beadwork. She seeks to create change with her art and has raised thousands of dollars for AIDS research through the sale of her artwork. And she's had collaborations with organizations including Visual Aid, the San Francisco Alliance Health Project, We Act, and ArtSpan. And she's been participating in programming at the De Young Museum, the Museum of the African Diaspora, and she's exhibited at the California African American Museum, and of course at Filoli Historic Museum and Garden, where the wonderful Rebecca Tillis found the work, and I give all props to Rebecca for having brought Kristine to Hillwood. So, yay, Rebecca. So we are thrilled that we do have some of Kristine's work available in the museum shop, so there are crowns there, and there are also pins. You'll see some of our staff member very proudly wearing their crown pins that you can buy in the shop. So, Rebecca Tillis is Hillwood's, and I always have to read this because she has the longest title of anybody ever. Hillwood's Associate Curator of 18th Century French and Western European Fine and Decorative Arts. Her business card is like this. She is the curator of Rich Soil, as I said. She earned her PhD in art history from the University of Sussex. She had a dissertation entitled George and Florence Blumenthal, A Collecting Partnership in the Gilded Age. She holds a bachelor's in French and French Cultural Studies from Wellesley College, a master's in European Decorative Arts from the Bard Graduate Center in New York, and she studied at the École du Louvre in Paris. She's currently working on another way cool exhibition called The Luxury of Clay, Porcelain Past and Present, and that will open in February in the Dacha. So, another thing to look forward to. Please join me in welcoming Kristine Mays and Rebecca Tillis. Thank you.
Thank you, Kate, for that lovely introduction. It's so nice to have you with us, Kristine. Thank you so much for being here, for sharing your vision and your talent and welcoming Rich Soil to Hillwood. We couldn't be more thrilled and so lucky to have you with us tonight. So thank you again for being with us to share more insight into your work.
Well, thank you. It's I don't know, it's just been like one big circle of joy, like joy upon joy, to be here, to see the grounds here. And, you know, when I originally made the work for Filoli out in California, I just never thought that it would go beyond that. I went into it without any expectation, and then to have received a call from you, it was just like, what? Okay. And so, you know, and this is my first exhibit of this range here on the East Coast, so that's great.
Well, we're so thrilled that you were receptive to that call, and that we were able to in just the span of a year, if you think about, I think that call when I reached out to you was last May or June. So
right.
It really goes to show that not only were you receptive and we could pull this together during a very difficult year of lockdown, but that there are some real silver linings that come out of, you know, staying in touch. Obviously, we were on different coasts, and being able to connect virtually and bring this here has been really such a thrill. So I thought before we get to coming to the East Coast and to Rich Soil, and we'll get there because I know there's a lot to talk about, I thought we'd start maybe a little bit further back at the beginning, and I wonder if you could tell us how and when you began working with wire.
Wow. Okay, here's a roller coaster. I originally, you know, I do describe myself as a maker, and it's mostly because I've always loved art. I've always just created whatever I could in the sense of just allowing my imagination to go. And so at the time I was really into beadwork and making dangly, dangly earrings that were layers of beads. And so I'd find myself at these bead stores just combing through all of this glass and, you know, looking for beads from all over the world to put together. And so I went into a bead store one day, just, you know, expecting to have my usual party. And I wandered around and I found a spool of wire, and it had an instruction, you know, it had like a whole advertisement about a workshop they were giving in which you could make wire candle holders that were structured sort of like a mini chandelier. And so I bought the wire and had no intention of going to the workshop because I looked at the display and I was like, I could try this at home. Like, I think I can figure it out. And so I took the materials home, played with them, did not like what I made. It was pretty sad. But what I loved was the texture and the feeling of working with wire. And it just really drew me in. And so there was a lot of experimenting with it. And at the same time, there was this idea of taking, I was working with the beads, but I was also doing lots of sketches. And I would take a sketchbook with me all the time on the bus, and I'd sketch people's portraits. Like, just, but to myself, because it was like a little tiny sketchbook. So to take what was flat and make it into something three-dimensional was really attractive to me, and so that's where the work with wire began.
And so can you take us from starting to work with wire and in the form of a candle holder, right, beaded candle holder, to then moving into the creation of human forms and figures and sculptures?
Okay. There was a moment where I realized I had been collecting. I did collage work as well, so I would collect magazines and I'd sit for hours and just cut out things from the magazine and do all these layerings of images. And so at some point I found a folder where I'd collected all of the images that I loved, and I ended up dropping it on the floor, and that's what fanned out. And I could see that it all came together in the sense that all the pictures I'd saved were people in movement. So it would be like dancers, or when you look at photo shoots where the model has wind blowing against her clothes, it was like that. So there was this idea I had of like wanting to capture a moment or like a gesture, and it was just, in a lot of ways it was very probably childlike in the sense of like daydreaming, like, oh, I wish I could make this into freeze frame, that kind of thing. And so that's part of where my motivation came to create like the human form. Originally, some of my first pieces in that regard were just these I say they're wire men. They were just kind of nondescript people that I wound the wire around. I just made sort of a framework of a body and then just made these big scrolly loops to hold the body together. And then I developed, like, my style of sculpting is something I came up with because I was trying to figure out how to interlock the work so that it would be strong, and yet, as we went down the process of me just learning how to use the wire, I figured out how to play with the idea of it being fluid as well.
And that leads me to I was going to ask you about your process and how that creates, if you could take us maybe from sort of start to finish of creating a piece, and if the design comes from, once you see a movement or emotion or something in the magazine that captures your attention, to how that overlapping of that wire and how the piece takes shape, because we know you don't use molds or mannequins.
Right.
It's all done by hand. So could you take us maybe from sort of
Sure.
start to finish, and also how long it takes to actually to do one sculpture?
As far as time frame, I was thinking about this yesterday. The physical time sometimes can be anywhere from maybe 5 to 8 weeks, but in terms of saying like how long did it take, it really all begins in my mind. So sometimes I can have processed how I'm going to create something, and then when I go to actually create it, it's like really fast. And then other times it's not as fast. And sometimes that also depends on how heavy of a subject it is. I'll do a lot of like stops and starts just because I'm trying to process emotionally what's going on within me as I make the piece. But I tend to collect photographs of people and or of movement. Lately, I've been collecting these pictures of like scarves. Like if it's a scarf that's just blowing, I'm like, oh, that's good. But I'll collect photographs and then I study the photo for a while. And I'll have it. I tend to either have it. Well, now that we're in this whole modern technology, I have Pinterest boards of images. But at some point, I'll sometimes I have them in print, and they're just hanging on a little, memo board that I pass every day, and I'm just sort of absorbing it. And then when I do begin to sculpt, what I'm absorbing when I'm looking at it is like places where that would, even though I'm looking at a photo, it's places that are the shadows. Like if I'm looking at you, I'm looking at how your clothes lay on your body. And, like for this dress, each of these little pleats is a place where I would make some sort of shape to denote that. But so I study like where the light is in the picture as far as what shadows it casts. And then I see those shadows as actual shapes. And so then when I begin to sculpt, I'm sculpting shapes. And in my mind, there's like a whole puzzle that's laid out. So I'm sculpting shapes, and then eventually I start to put 2 or 3 together, and then I build on that, and I just keep building. And a lot of the blueprint is in my head. So if someone walked in on me, they would, a lot of times my mom will be like, what in the world are you working on? And it's just all these random shapes. And I'm like, oh, that's the bottom of somebody's jacket. And she's like, okay. So it just comes together in that way.
It is amazing to me that that those shadows and those shapes that you see, can come together not only in, made in parts and then be assembled to create that visual effect that you see in your mind. It's amazing. Are there any things that do change? Do you tend to keep the same vision sort of throughout the process, or have you ended up redesigning something sort of, midway through?
It always changes. The sculpture takes on its own life, so I have to allow that to happen. And every piece has like its moment where it's just ugly, and then there's that feeling, where I'm just like, oh, I quit. Like I don't know. And a lot of times I can push forward with it. There's been other times where I'm just ready to abandon a piece, and I'll be like, this is so bad, this is so ugly. And then I'll just, now I've grown to know just to let it rest for a minute and then, come back to it. But they always take on their own life. They always surprise me because I don't know all that's there until I see it together. So, for instance, I had a piece that I almost abandoned because I was like, this is going, I don't know where this piece is going. Like I thought it was going one way, but I don't know. Almost it was a dress that had a lot of ruffles and rouging, and it felt like I got lost in these waves of wire. So I just was like, this is not working. So I set it against the wall, and then I left the room for a few hours, and I came back and I could see it from the doorway. And then I was like, oh, like nothing is lost. It's actually better than I thought. And then I was able to go back to it. So there's a lot of trusting that has to go on.
And what do you hope that viewers take away or think of when they see your work? Because again, what's I think so unique and profound is this contrast and this play between this very industrial, I would say not necessarily malleable material that creates such a wonderful, light, airy figure in motion. And I assume that contrast is not lost on the viewer, but what do you hope that viewers will think of or take away from your work?
I think my thought around the work and anyone that engages with it is just, I think, first of all, I'm always honored that people want to see it and that I'm able to share it. That's like the first and foremost thing that comes to mind. But I would love for people to be pointed more towards some sort of self-reflection. And that's, obviously when you put your work out, you don't know what how they will respond or what the reaction will be. And that's not really my business to try to dictate that. But if I were to just give a random wish, it would be that it offers like space for reflection, like either about life or humanity or, how we view ourselves. I notice a lot of women have a reaction to it, or and it's always great when they're reaffirmed, like as to who they are and as to how they relate to their bodies. And so, I mean, all of that is great. My hope is just that people would walk away with some impression and be left with something that would linger in their mind when they get home at night.
And speaking of women, you have said before, and I would love to talk a little bit more about it tonight, that you tend to stick with or prefer sort of the female form when you're making sculptures, obviously a variety of dresses and different, the feminine sort of theme throughout your work. And I wondered if you could just talk a little bit about how that came to be, and if you could talk about any masculine pieces that you have attempted in the past.
Yeah, I tend to create women and dresses and feminine shapes, and that's mostly because those shapes are more organic. At one show, I remember this man came up to me as a businessman. And I'm noting that because he was, buttoned up and he had the full suit and everything, cufflinks and all. And he was like, "So what do you have against men?" And I said, "I don't have anything against men." And he's like, "Well, all I see are women here." And I said, well, first of all, like, women's clothing and everything is way more fluid. So there's just way, so many more options as far as just having fun creating. I said, I've attempted to create sculptures that were men's clothing, but men's clothing is very structured and nice and neat. And so it just becomes boxy, and it really takes away from what I can do creatively. So for that reason, I stick to women's garments. If I do sculpt men, which there's some men in this exhibit, but they're always naked because then you can go with the organic shapes of like muscle tone and all of that. But yeah, if I do, there's been an occasion where I've made blazers, men's blazers and men's shirts, but it's always where they're kind of wrinkled. And it has to be that way, because if I stick to the integrity of the clothing, it's very tailored and structured.
not as
exciting to
little
play
less
with
action.
Fluidity.
So I wonder if we could talk a little bit about Rich Soil. Could you tell us a little bit about that name? And of course, we know Hillwood is the second venue for the exhibition. It opened at Filoli Historic House and Gardens in May. It was on view there from May to November of 2020.
Right.
Could you tell us a little bit about the title of the exhibition and how that project came to fruition in California?
Sure. When I originally toured Filoli, they invited me to see the grounds. They found me actually through like a web search, which is wild. I had never been to their estate, and so I went and did a tour, and they said, like, this is, it was, I think it's 14 acres. So they said, why don't you look and see if you can take on this project? So as we walk the grounds, I mean, it's a beautiful place, I mean, this is an extraordinary place. So it's very different than here, but similar in the regard that there was an estate house and then these beautiful manicured gardens that were just, breathtaking. So we wandered around, and as much as I loved everything I saw and was just so in awe of everything, I kept paying attention to the various gardeners that were out there, and they were various people pruning things, and I had thought, like, this is beautiful, but like, who are the people tending to this land, and who are the people that have maintained these grounds over the years? Like, who were these people? So we got into a full conversation about it in one area of the house. We were looking at like a census page about the people who'd lived there and were servants there, and a lot of the people who were like of color, like black and brown people, weren't represented on this census. And some of it is because of the way history is. And, I don't know what all the reasons were, but this particular page that they had, it was all people of European descent. So as I asked questions, I'm like, well, what about people from Mexico? And she said, well, we have people, she kept referring back to the census page. And so as we talked, I said, well, here in California, the agricultural belt was like 20 to 30 minutes away as far as where all of this whole environment and community of Hispanic people live and work the land. So I'm like, how is it that they didn't work the land here, but they're over here? I mean, so we had this sort of uncomfortable conversation, and it all kept coming back to me, this idea of like people who contribute to our world and the way in which we live, but often go unnoticed and invisible. And so rich soil came out of this idea of making the invisible visible. And so my thought was just that I wanted to honor like the people who had come before me, all the ancestors that had come before. And so in my daydreaming, the idea was that they rose up from the soil, and they had finished all their labor, and they rose up from the soil, and they danced, and they, had this sense of relief, and they prayed and praised and laughed and, just celebrated life. And so that's where it came from.
And I have to say, when we were sort of unpacking the sculptures and finally placing the first grouping that we installed last Monday was in the cutting garden, and knowing that, it was the ancestors also rising from the land, but all of us kind of coming back from, being at home and inside and coming out and celebrating and seeing these figures rise together with sort of all of us coming back to life. It was very emotional, and I think there are many layers. And so that sort of leads me to my next question, which is, how has it been to see your work transition from Filoli to Hillwood? How has it been to see the groupings in a slightly different environment? And were there any surprises? Are there any groupings that you're particularly proud of, ones that have changed the way you saw them in the first installation?
Yeah. It's to bring it here to the East Coast, it took on a different context. Like on the West Coast, we've had so much conversation around immigrant farmers and all of the things. I mean, we're right here next to Mexico, so all of this talk of immigration and who belongs and who doesn't belong, and so then to come here, being on this coast, it gave me, I mean, it was a different set of ancestors. I thought more of you know, Africans coming here and being enslaved, or the native people that were here, and the Americans that, you know, the European people that were here, and the fact that we're here in Washington, D.C., and that this is on a coast where so much of our country was founded. It took on a whole different context, and at the same time, it's all American history. So it's just really been interesting to look at it in that way. I think with regard to ancestry and honoring the ancestors, I think we all can honor the ancestors. I don't think this is just like a black people or a people of color thing. And so it's just, I mean, I don't even have words for it. It's very profound. At some point, I'm not, and I have to say this, I'm not, I don't tend to go towards politics directly as like, oh, this is my interest. I feel like I've been pushed into that role. My work takes on a social context or a social consciousness simply because these are the things that weigh so heavily on me. And so it felt like a risk in some ways because I know that it's not necessarily a subject that everyone wants to engage in. And yet at the same time, there's enough with the work for it to be received however any of you choose to receive it and however anyone chooses to receive it. So, you know, we can relax in the fact that there's beauty there, and there's dancing, and there's joy, and there's everything, every, you know, range of emotion there. And then if people want to dive more into the narratives and the descriptions, they can go there as well. And so there's room for everyone.
And one of the reasons, you know, that I was so interested in also exploring bringing Rich Soil to Hillwood was this connection to dance. I'm sure you've heard us talk a little bit about this, and Marjorie posts, you know, interest and patronage and support, and also a talented dancer herself. And there are many objects in the collection, and some, you know, on view explored in Roaring Twenties at the moment with the Russian avant-garde and the Ballet Russe. But in addition to dance, you know, we're so proud that your work and this ancestry, this history, and who toiled the land, and who was, you know, who were the souls and the spirits, and then you know, of those that were that went unnamed, has really inspired a lot of us at Hillwood as a team to look into our own history and uncover a lot of this information that and to unveil it in connection with this project. And I just want to mention how proud and how grateful we are for all of these wonderful parallels and connections, because I think it's part of, there's in addition to dance, as we know, there are so many other wonderful connections that we're able to celebrate with you. So thank you again for inspiring us and allowing us to bring that to life.
Thanks.
Speaking of a few inspirational parts of the exhibition, I personally was particularly moved by two pieces, two sculptures that when we unpacked had a real emotional response to, and they incorporate quotes that are woven into the dresses. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the significance of these quotes and their connection to Rich Soil.
Sure. Could you read the Maya Angelou quote?
Yes.
Okay, because I don't want to paraphrase it. I've been paraphrasing it.
Oh, the full one. Hold on. You know what? I don't. It's
okay, then I'm going to paraphrase.
Paraphrase.
Okay, there's a dress. Actually, it's just right behind us in the motor court, and it says.
It's the one on the far.
It
the far
says,
right.
"There's no greater agony than an untold story inside you." Bearing an untold story inside you, and so. I wanted to share, it's a quote by Maya Angelou, and I wanted to share it particularly for the installation that's right here, because this is the installation that greets you when you come in. And I just thought, with working with this idea of making the invisible visible, my thought was like, if their stories couldn't have been shared, then maybe in some way I could be like the intercessor in that. And so, and the other thing is, each of the installations has a description, but I've kind of nicknamed them on my own as I've made the pieces. And so I consider these as the women who are like the greeters or the guardians. Like in a church setting, they'd be like the usher board. Like in a party setting, they would be the hostesses. In a family reunion, they'd be like the aunties waiting to say hello to everyone. So they're kind of, they set the tone, I think, for the whole exhibit as far as just greeting you and pulling you in.
And could you tell us about the second quote as well?
Yes. There's a grouping of 4 pieces, and they're sort of tucked away. They have like some shade around them, and they have all these beautiful flowers growing around them. And one of the dresses says, I'm trying to remember.
I'm sorry, I didn't bring the...
How it starts off. It says, if you are silent about your pain, they will kill you and say you enjoyed it. And it's a Zora Neale Hurston quote. And basically the way that it's placed, there's a hoodie that's next to it that I created in honor of Trayvon Martin. And so I'm really honoring like the young ancestors, unfortunately. And so that's next to that particular dress. And then on the other side, there's a sculpture of a dress and then a guy's shirt. And it's, in my mind, it's Breonna Taylor, and it's pretty much any black male who has died at the hands of the police. And so they're a part of this exhibit as well,
And new pieces that were made
They
for
are.
Hillwood.
The dress with the quote is a new piece that I made specifically for Hillwood.
And can you talk a little bit more about the process of these beautiful poetic sort of texts and chats that sort of identify each grouping and how they're so beautiful? I mean, they really could be published in their own right. How did that process come to be?
It's I tend to show my work with a narrative, so that, and it's just like a little blurb that kind of is whatever I'm thinking, but also my hope is that it'll pull you into either gathering a little bit of, with regard to clues about who I am and what my work is about, but also just, gives like a little something to reflect upon as you're looking at the work. And it's usually just me jotting down notes like as I'm working on something. So for instance, like All Night Worship is a round of sculptures, and it's all, torsos of people with their hands in different positions. And it's like this joyous circle of praise, in a sense. And so, the words that are with that are just whatever my thoughts were at the time. And I always tend to feel like I have way more thoughts, which tend to just spill out on paper in order to just process.
I think that grouping is that's the one in the cutting garden that was the first grouping to be installed, and I think that maybe also ancestral spin on the Vista Lana, I think the two maybe potentially the most interactive groupings that visitors I think could really, especially in the cutting garden, being able to walk, because they're in a circle, to be able to walk through the garden and be faced with 3 figures facing you one way and then see a different perspective on the other side, and also being able to walk around those 6 figures in ancestral spin on the lawn too, I think is a really wonderful component to seeing the work. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about what's next for you and what any other projects that are on the horizon or that you're currently working on. We know you make some beautiful crowns, and we know that there's also another exhibit in Washington. Can you tell us a little bit about what you're working on now?
Well, I'm very excited that, as we said, I'm from San Francisco. I'm really excited that while I'm here, I'm also having a show over at Zenith Gallery. And the openings for that are July 14th, and there's another opening on July 17th. And it's just, I'm working with Marjorie Goldberg. She's the director of the museum, of the gallery. And it's just really exciting to be able to show my work here as well as there. And it actually is, gives a broader scope of what I create. So if you get a chance to see both shows, that would be great. So I'm working on that. I'm also working on lots of conversations about projects. And so that's been exciting. I tend never to know, like, what's next,
Oh, right, Atlanta.
Oh, that's right. Well, I did put together an installation in Atlanta. It's at a MARTA station, and there's 3 leaping people, like 3. It's based on this African folklore tale of the flying Africans, and it's around the story of Africans realizing that they had special powers, and they would fly out of their oppression in the middle of the night and return home. And so all of them are in some form of leaping. They're on display like at the opening of the station when you come in.
Are those on the wall or on the? Are they?
No, they're actually suspended from the ceiling.
So you've got very different ways of actually of mounting your work.
Right.
Outside, this is the first exhibition in the garden after Filoli, and then of course normally some pieces are mounted on the wall, and those are actually, so that's quite
it's pretty exciting.
An engineering challenge. Well, I want to leave some time for questions from the live audience and also from our virtual audience. I know Erin is here to help moderate the questions both in the room and from afar, so I'll let Erin turn it over to you.
We do have several questions coming in already, but I'd like to invite those of you joining us via Zoom to use the Q&A module there. For those of you who are in the room with us this evening, you can scan one of the QR codes, or you did get a link to a very simple SurveyMonkey earlier this evening. It's just one question, and all you need to do is share your questions, and we'll make sure that we relay those to Kristine. So, Kristine, one of the first questions that came in was a question about how you came to create life-sized work.
Wow. Good question. How did I come to create life-size work? I think that it really was just childhood fascination. I mean, I made small pieces, and then I kept thinking, like, I wonder if I could make this a little bigger. And then it would, at some point it was like an odd size, like where the pieces were like a 10-year-old child. And then someone was like, why don't you just make it life size? And then I just went a little bit bigger. But it was always like, everything has always been this, for lack of a better way to put it, a matter of playing around and like play, and then just experimenting with seeing if I can push something a little further. So that's pretty much how I came into making life-size work. It was just from experimenting and taking it bigger and bigger, and hopefully even bigger.
Are they going to continue to grow?
I hope so. I've been like playing with the idea of like monumental size work. Like I met an engineer recently who does all of the like 2 or 3 story, monument type. He even does like the engineering for like Burning Man, those big like 3-story sculptures. So that would be fun to eventually do something like that.
Wow.
I love that idea, and I also love the vision of it starting as kind of a challenge to yourself to just keep going. And so I'm looking forward to not only the 3-story work, but what will come after that.
Right.
But back to the questions from our visitors. You talked a little bit about your process early on, but one of our guests asked whether you wear gloves normally when you're working with the wire or whether you are directly manipulating the material.
And we have a case of tools just in the other room.
I do wear gloves. I wear these 100% cotton string gloves. I've spent time experimenting with different gloves to see what works, because some of them are, too stiff or too rubbery where it's hard to feel the actual materials in my hand. And so I do wear string gloves, and then I'll put both on. These are all like the little insider scoop here. No, I'll put both on, but then as I start to work, I take off one. So I'm just using one glove that I'm using with the pliers. And then I use my other hand as like a guide. Like I need to feel the actual materials in my hand. So I tend to have really like grease embedded in my fingertips, and I'm constantly hand washing, and yeah, that's my process.
Kristine was nice enough to give us a pair of her gloves, pliers, and some wire pre and post manipulation that are on display, just to help, I think, visualize that process of manipulation.
We got a couple of questions about how you transport the work. And I know Rebecca mentioned a little bit of unwrapping them.
I tend to make cloth bags for each piece, and I measure it. I mean, it's just muslin fabric, but I measure it out so that each piece has its own, covering. And then if it's long distance, it's boxed in a really sturdy carton to be shipped. It really just depends on like where it's being sent. Sometimes it's wooden crates, sometimes it's 2-walled cardboard, containers that are made for the pieces. What else?
I can help you answer that if you want, since I've just got a whole shipment in. Actually, they're easy to ship, really.
They really
Put them in a
are.
bag and she puts them in a box. They're about the easiest things I've gotten from anybody, You don't even bubble wrap them, because they look fragile, but they're really, really strong.
Right.
So they don't take much to ship. Really.
And
Yeah.
We didn't talk
If I take them across town, it's just, where I'm actually carrying them to a car, and we gently place them in the car. And I only laughed when you first asked me, because at some point, I don't own a car. I live in San Francisco, so it's a lot of walking in buses, and now we're into using Ubers and Lyfts. But at one point, I just had a luggage cart, and I had my pieces. So I'm like on the bus with someone's really nice piece, and people are just like, "What is she doing?" And it's so it's been fairly easy to transport.
And we didn't mention this earlier, but the wire, as you've explained, is actually used in building homes and buildings. I mean, it's construction grade wire, so it is extremely strong and durable. It's not really gonna collapse on itself.
Yeah, it's steel wire. I think they're taking questions from the back.
Yep, so all of the questions are being submitted through your devices. The QR codes that are on the windows and by the doors back here are the way to submit those for folks who are in the room. And that helps us for a couple of reasons, including the fact that we can more easily integrate the fact that we have about half of us gathered here and half of us watching from home. So when you send your questions, I will add them to my list, and I promise we will get to them. One of our guests asked about the way that the sculptures are mounted in the gardens and that they are on poles. And they were wondering if that is simply for practicality or if there's another reason behind the way they're mounted.
They are actually mounted on poles for practicality. I tend to, up until this point, my work has all been shown indoors. And so the work is made so that it mounts on the wall almost as a relief sculpture. So some of the pieces don't have backs in order to allow you to fully see it. And it also gives you the option of playing with the lighting and casting shadows, and so without the backing, you have a lot more freedom as far as visually what you end up seeing. And so when I was approached with this project for Filoli, I knew I had limited time to figure out how to place these sculptures in the garden and in an environment where they had nothing around them. And so that's where the poles came in. And so at this point it's worked. I'm still playing around in my mind as to if there's another show or some other iteration of this, like just how I would go about mounting them into the ground.
We got a couple of questions, and I know we've already spoken a little bit about the text that accompanies each grouping of figures. But we've gotten a couple of folks who ask about that poetry, which is so expressive, and whether you consider yourself a writer in addition to a sculptor, and whether there might be a book with photographs of your work and the accompanying descriptions in the work.
Well, thank you. I've been reluctant to say I'm a writer, but I really am a writer. I have a dream of making, a book that would be like my artwork as well as stories. Over the last 2 years, I've been writing stories just about like snippets of childhood, I realized recently, I feel like I learned a lot of lessons about adulthood as a child, and now I'm sort of seeing, I remember learning this when I was 5 or whatever it is, in terms of like the themes of things that have come up in life. So I am writing here and there, and my hope would be to pair the two together into a book.
I'll speak for everyone when I say that's my hope too. You mentioned the grouping of figures that references the younger ancestors, and including the shirt that represents, you said, every black man in America who has died at the hands of police. One of our guests asked how this moment of racial reckoning in the country has inspired or affected your creativity.
Wow. It's been hard. It's I think, the show that I'm doing at Zenith Gallery is called Weight of the World. And, Marjorie contacted me and said, what do you want to title the show? and I'm like sitting there, Weight of the World. And then, and then I was like, once I, answered, I'm like, that's kind of heavy. Like, that's like, and then all the self-judging went on. Like, why don't you think of something more uplifting? And I was like, no, but, the bulk of that work has, I would paraphrase that show as like the things that keep me up at night. And so to make a piece that's about, black men dying at the hands of the police is not an easy feat. And in all honesty, a lot of the work sometimes makes me uncomfortable. And then I'm like, why am I in this position? I have to say this. Because even with Rich Soil, it was like, okay, do I want to address all that is here? And yet there's an inner conviction that I have to do that. And so I just try to honor, God's word the most I can in doing what I know that is my purpose of what I should do. And so to get back to your question, how has that affected me? It's greatly affected me, both personally and, with regard to just looking at the world and at the lack of humanity and at the ways that we have to strive to do better and be better and really look and embrace and love each other. It all kind of comes back to that for me. And at the same time, I feel like it's something that I have to do in order, as far as recognizing those people.
Thank you for sharing that and for the work. It seems from the tail end of your remarks about how we need to work on improving and being better. That seems like a great moment to transition. We've talked a little bit about the crown project. There are crowns available in the museum shop, and I think at this point every Hillwood staff member has at least one. Sorry, we've been hoarding them. But there are pins available as well. Can you talk to us a little bit about that project?
Sure. It's another winding road. There was some period of time where, I don't know if we were like in a recession or what, but artists were really, really struggling. And there was all this talk of like, my sales have gone down. I don't know how I'm going to keep making work, or, all of the doubts came to the surface. All of my artist friends were like, I don't know if I even want to show because blah, 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 or whatever it was, this sort of pessimistic view of the world at the moment. And so I viewed it as like, okay, if we're not selling work, like, let's have fun. And here's a time to like experiment with things. And so people kept asking me, or they'd make the remark of like, I wish I could wear this. I wish I could put this on. I would love to wear this. And so I made a whole collection of like these wearable things like collars, and there were crowns, and there was like this big Robin Hood type hat that that was made out of wire they could try on. And so it was a whole show that just was interactive, and I'd let people come and they could try it on, they could take a picture with it. And then I went on to do some other projects, but the other projects that followed were just the crowns. And my thought was, I paired it with various quotes. There was an Audre Lorde quote about how, which another paraphrase, but it was so important to me, but I can't remember it. No, it was like this quote that was about, you have the power within you, and you can't, and I'm seriously paraphrasing here, but it was, the message was that you have the power within you, and no one can do what you can do. They can't take your power, and you can't take their power. We all have our own, core at which we can create change. And so the idea was to give people a crown to try on, and they could put on their power, like, and you could see people transformed as they came and tried them on. And you know, it was a big selfie moment for a lot of people. And it was fun just to see everyone change as they put on these crowns. And so that's sort of where I'm coming from with this idea of continuing to make crowns. I did another project called Monarch, and it was a women's empowerment event, and it was all women putting on crowns. And so it's been, you know, it's run the gamut. There was a LGBTQ community that put on a big event, and we did the crowns, had a crown station there. So I mean, it kind of transforms and takes on lots of different forms depending on the groups that I share it with.
You tell a funny story that a woman refused to put on a crown and thought she was just, you know, too old or too sophisticated, and just completely transformed her whole personality when she put it on.
This lady was so serious, and she was just so against it for whatever reason. And she was in, you know, full business wear, and had gone to this art event, I guess after work or something. She was just like, "This is nonsense. Who would do such foolishness?" And I was like, "It's just a crown, like, just try." And her friends were trying them on, and she was just like, "I'm not touching that." And they were just like, "Come on." And then she put it on, and her whole face lit up. And it's like, I mean, it looked like a 5-year-old. Like, I could see the girl in her. She just was like, and it was the best. It was the best thing ever. I mean, I'll never forget that.
That's amazing. That's amazing. And I love that the Crown Project is so empowering, but it's empowering for every person, which is a nice transition to another question we got about how the work of making the invisible visible is being tackled. We got one question about how Hillwood is helping make that one of your points, something that folks take away from the exhibition. And we got another question about how cultural institutions are and how they're succeeding and failing to reframe their history, and if either of you have thoughts to share about that from a public history standpoint. Tough questions, I know.
Like, would you like to go first?
I mean, sure, I'm happy to. I think over the last year and a half, I think we've all seen a lot of institutions tackle these questions and, as they say, decolonize the collection and really dig deep into land acknowledgements, and as we've been talking about the history of the land and what the ancestry behind where we all live and work and call home. I know, I think Hillwood, as we're working on a new publication that's coming out next year, was already sort of initiating a lot of this research. But what Kristine's message and these themes behind rich soil really, I think, pushed and encouraged us to advance that process in time for this exhibition. And I don't know if any of you have had a chance, because it literally just went live last week on our website, but you can, next to the text panel in the visitor center, right here is where we're hoping visitors will start to read about the exhibition. There will be a video, and we have Erica Woods here tonight, who's one of the producers of this film that's actually going to be part of this installation very soon, and we're hoping visitors will then start visiting the exhibition by coming out to the motor court from the visitor center. But there is a shortened land acknowledgement with a QR code, which you can use with your phone to take you to a much larger document. I think it's about 4 pages. Wilfred, I think that 4.5 pages. Which is you can find that on Hillwood's website, both on the estate page of the first page of the website, or it's also linked to the exhibition page for Rich Soil. and I hope that many of you will take the time to read it. It's quite informative. I think it's a living document that will continue to grow as our research continues to grow and advance, and as this publication, I think more research will be underway over the next year. But it's a wonderful place to start, and I think it's a wonderful moment to really think about the history of the land that we're sitting on.
I think that it's, we've...
The ancestors are speaking.
Oh, there's lightning right there.
I think they're communicating.
I think that it's interesting. There's all kinds of lightning going on right now. It's interesting to take the history that we have and to look at different people who are part of making up, the reality that we live in right now. And so it makes me happy to know that in some ways we're shifting the focus, and it's not that it's not that anyone is losing anything. It's just that the story takes on a richer context. Like for instance, right now on Netflix, there's this documentary, High on the Hog, and they talk about food coming to, the African influence of food onto American culture, and like just the ways in which, historically, African Americans have contributed to the things that we even see as like all American foods. And so I think that as we as organizations and institutions focus and choose to shift the narrative a little bit, there's just more and more that can be gleaned from that. I don't see how that would even, if anything, it's a win-win, no matter how you slice it.
After a couple of very heavy questions, it seems appropriate to finish with a softball. And that is, as we know, the pandemic has changed a lot of, everything really, but prices. And so we got a question about whether the steel wire that you use is one of those items that has become incredibly challenging to find and 3 times as much, or if you have a storage unit somewhere in San Francisco stuffed to the brim.
Wow. It is, steel prices do influence my wire. So I did not know that at first. And then I was like, why does this keep, why does the price keep going up? And then it would, at times it would go down a little bit, then it'd go back up. And there's so much new construction in the Bay Area in general that I cannot get wire from the Bay Area. If I go and buy it, I could get wire from the Midwest for half the price. And that's including the shipping. So it's been my thing to just order it from somewhere, and then I have them bring, cases, which are like 20 spools. It's like 100 pounds worth of wire at once. And so I have to, watch the tracking and all, because usually the delivery people are mad when they arrive. I'm always like, hi, or, making sure I greet them and making sure I'm at home, because if I'm not, they have to unload 100 pounds and then put it back on their truck. But yes, the steel prices do make up quite a difference, and they do vary, just like with any stock.
And just as an aside to that, do you want to talk a little bit about your paint choices when it comes to the copper versus some of the other colors that
sure.
you've used on the wire?
In general, I tend to I select paint colors and I spray paint a lot of work. I've been looking into like powder coating, which is like a process they do on cars. But it's, it's very pricey. And so when I thought about the work being outdoors, one of the things that I knew was that just through, the physicality of the work and the materials, steel is going to rust. It's just inevitable. And the patina will advance based on the weather. So there's work that I have that I've left out for 2 years, and it still looks sort of dark because the natural color of the wire is dark. But when we came here, just the humidity alone, it already started the process of patina. So what I chose to do was to take it as far as I could, and I thought it'll eventually become like a really rich pumpkin orange color. And so I decided to pick out a paint color, which was a shiny penny. That's what it was called. It was copper color. And so I painted them all shiny penny, and so that they would already have the look of what you will eventually get towards the end of the show. And then if anyone decides that they'd like to have one in their collection, they know what to expect as far as any patina. If they choose to exhibit it outside, they know what to look forward to. And then with the material, even though it goes through this transformation, the material is strong and has a life expectancy of like over 75 years. So it's really just a matter of the actual look of it.
Shiny penny. I'll remember
Shiny
that.
penny.
I'll remember that. Did not know that.
Well, Kristine, thank you so much for a wonderful conversation this evening. I want to thank everyone both on site and those of you who are here with us through Zoom for spending a few extra minutes with us and for your great questions. I know there are a few more that we will have to save for another moment, but I do want to thank you for great questions. And Kristine, I'm so thrilled that you could be here with us this evening.
Thanks.
Thank you.
There's a neat